Okay. So this is not an update video per se, but this is gonna be a video where I'm just kind of going to discuss, at least for COVID specifically, about how variants can usually start. Although I will actually post a longer video, just going to be a short, just overall discussion video. So generally, what it takes to get a new variant is usually you're going to need some sort of genetic change within sort of genetic change that becomes a new variant. So usually spike proteins change or different genes in within the virus's genetic code change in them that allows it to either do better immune escapes, so it's better able to escape antibodies, is better able to get into cells, stuff like that, for example. So far, at least in the current pandemic as we are in right now, I wish I brought up the graph about two particular spike proteins that were able to actually show when a new wave usually began, because those usually I oscillate back and forth. But usually it takes, and when I mean a new variant, I mean a new major lineage. I'm not talking about all these other sequences here. I'm talking about a new major lineage that fundamentally changes the transmission pattern. Usually it takes either two things. So usually you either need an immunocompromised person or a person whose immune system is weakened enough so their body cannot effectively clear a pathogen. So in that case, you'd have a person contract COVID, they have the virus, and then it becomes a chronic infection within them where it continues to mutate and evolve itself within them as it evolves inside of them to fight off their immune system and get better at adapting within them. And then at some point, the virus is able to jump out of that person. And by jump out, I mean infect a person outside of them, although that takes a bit longer to do. And then that new variant gets into circulation and it begins changing itself so it's able to more effectively spread between people. And then once it's able to do that, you have a new variant that can achieve dominance and fundamentally change the immune landscape, and that usually gives you a large wave because people do not have any sort of immunity to it, and it will probably be able to easily infect them because usually COVID has an R number around 3, but judging by wastewater, it will be the sixth common virus on Earth in humans specifically. So it spreads pretty constant, and because it's pretty infectious, it's going to be able to get around most people pretty easily. Because the average infection, at least according to JP Wellen, when I last checked, at least for Americans specifically, was one every 2 years. So roughly half the population a year contracts the virus, which is a lot of people. The second way, which is easier than the first way, is for variants to combine. So this actually happened with XBB, which is right here. These colors here are a bit blank. They changed the colors and they added them to the newest variants, but before, I think a few months ago, JN1 would have been red. But XBB was a recombinant variant that I think took a combination of one of the Omicron BA variants here and mixed it with another one, and then we got XBB, and that required a new vaccine change to account for changes to the spike protein and its genetic makeup because the vaccines used against Omicron, although Omicron I don't think had specific vaccines made for it. It was more vaccines made for Alpha, made for the Wuhan strain or the wild strain back in 2020, 2019 for that strain that worked decently well against Alpha and Delta, but not very much against Omicron. XBB is an offshoot of that, an offspring of Omicron, but these are so far divergent from Omicron, which they're not the same anymore. So this required a new vaccine update, and then that happened in the winter in 2022 and was down in winter 23. For 2023, it took about until summer to realize BA 2.6 came about. That was the next major lineage, and then it's
and its descendant JN.1, which is a more evolved version of it that had a more refined ability to infect people, and especially having immune escape, and was more able to infect the digestive tract of people because it was more effective at that. It was able to get around and be the second largest wave since Omicron in many places around the world. And I think estimated prevalence at peak was about 4% of the population in the UK, which in the United States, which is around 4% peak infected during a week. So cumulative, that would be about over the full wave. It would have been closer to around 1/3 of people were infected during the full wave, but at peak transmission would have been 4%. So 4% of the population of the United States is around 12 million people. Just so you can get an idea of how many people that is. Not even 12 million. It's actually closer to 15 because the U.S. population is 3.3 million people. The U.S. population is 330 million people, close to 340, so it's around 15 million people. So those two required vaccine updates. Stuff like KP 3.11 XCC, these are from these major dominant lineages. However, they don't require a vaccine update because they're similar enough where the vaccines are still going to be effective against them. So, for example, the vaccine released in September against the JN, all variants linked to JN.1, that was effective against KP, KP1, KP2, KP 3.11, and XCC. So XCC, for example, is not a major change compared to JN.1 and XBB. So it didn't really generate a large COVID wave over the winter. But the KPs did generate a large summer wave because it was one variant gaining dominance after the other. So the wave just kept going up before it plateaued towards the middle of summer, and then as we got into September, it finally started coming down, and then we had a pretty quiet fall, which led us into our lower than normal peak in winter, which is quite good. But still, in the United States, we're still somehow getting 1,000 deaths from COVID a day. Not a day, a week in the country somehow with lower transmission. Now, what would it take to get a new variant at this level? Now, one possibility, which I already mentioned, was can compromise people. So, for example, Mark Johnson on Twitter, he has this information here where he studies cryptic lineages. So, for example, one way to get a major wave or new variant to come out would be if one of these cryptic lineages that's sitting in these immunocompromised people across the country or across the world were to escape, especially these ones from that are evolved infections from Delta, Alpha, stuff variants that were circulating in 2021, especially. That would be a major shock to the system because our current variants that we're looking at are around here and also here. I think it's more here though. So this is wildly divergent from both of these. So the antibodies wouldn't be there to really protect against it. They may be able to protect against severe disease. However, even that's a little questionable about how divergent it would be. So this is really playing with a house of cards here. You really don't know what you're gonna get, and we have to be hopeful that we get lucky and we don't get something out of here that's too crazy or too, well, I say divergent, but that's the right word. Too divergent from what we've seen, because then we might go back. There might be a chance that if things go poorly enough that we go back to square one, and square one meant body bags, mass graves. So we have to be really careful. We have to be really careful about new variants that do emerge because any way that does happen, will likely have high infections, which will already raise the issue with long COVID and then this ability to cause immune dysfunction, which is another paper I have open. But also, any new wave in the infections happening, give the virus another chance to really evolve and then get to a point where it can make change in path where it can do, well, not necessarily it can do, but its lethality rate could go up significantly with a few changes, for example. And it wouldn't meaningfully affect the virus's transmission at all because COVID's death trail, rather, I'll draw it, is not like this, where it lines up with infections. It's more, it's more infections are here, and then the deaths don't really start kicking up until multiple weeks afterward. And it's more of a flat wave of death where there's a constant strain on the healthcare system. So, as we go into more into 2025, because we have so much evolution going on with the virus, but we haven't had a major lineage yet. Also see the world map here. The main things to get a new lineage right now would be variants from across the world either combining together to create a new variant that's able to evade vaccines and the current immune response enough to get that advantage where we get a large wave, which I would define as at least 2.5% of people to 4% of people infected, which a very large wave would be higher than that. But a large wave would be 2.5 to 4% people infected at peak of the wave. So if we were to get something like that, it could be either a recombination where we have so many of these variants out here that they recombine into something. So maybe LP8 here combined with some KP or a variant out of China, for example, because not their transmission, but their variants in China are different than internationally because most people in China travel domestically and don't really travel internationally. So the variants there are different. So if they mix together, can get more of a combination difference here, and then we can see where it goes from there. Or like I just mentioned, where one of these cryptic lineages that gets highly evolved, which this would be more of a worst case scenario, that gets highly evolved like this down here. Get a highly evolved lineage that people don't have protection to, and can easily spread through a lot of people pretty quickly before we really pick it up because there's not as much sequencing, especially there's not much testing and sequencing of COVID variants now as there was in the earlier years of the pandemic when people were dying at such a high rate. We're not there anymore, but we don't have that capacity anymore because it's been removed. For that to if this were to happen, although this is less likely, this would be the much more damaging outcome. So just as a thing to watch out for COVID variants to really start new lineages, it's either going to be from at least right now, the two main ways that we've seen so far is from a person who's had the virus in them for a long period of time, years, immunocompromised for years in them, and then it evolves and gets out of them. Recombination of variants. And then maybe a third option would be because the virus is spreading within the ecosystem now, although it may be a lesser chance, maybe the virus is evolving enough in, say, deer or aquatic marine mammals, or enough in wildlife that people interact with, that we could get a variant that's adapted more to mammals like deer that jumps back into humans, and then we have a problem where it's still a similar virus, but it's structured differently and behaves differently. That's something else that we have to look at. But either way,
because COVID does have a propensity to cause some immune dysregulation or more severe types where your T cells that are good at actually remembering and fighting off infections, not fighting off infections directly, but remembering and keeping that memory for the immune system to help you out against future infections and balancing everything. Because it causes this dysfunction, that helps other viruses, but that also means there's probably going to be in the future more and more people get into a state where we're going to have more people who are going to be able to have a persistent COVID infection. And then that means that because they're able to have that, it's going to be more opportunities to have people forming new lineages within them
and then those jumping out and being a problem. We have to be wary of that. It is 2025, so main things to watch for this year, just slight deviation from the video, not just for this, is do we see any new variants from COVID specifically? Do we see bird flu, for example? Has it mixed? Has the high flu season that we just had mixed in? Have we seen any reassortment there mixing in, where we have a bird flu virus, whatever strain is mixed in with a human one, and then we start seeing it spreading between people? Are we getting to the point where we have enough where the virus gets human to human transmission traits? H5N1 specifically, which variant gets that? Does it get those traits, and how does it affect people afterward? Is the fatality rate going to be as high as that 50% range that we were looking at? There's a lot of questions that we have to ask, and this now also including new diseases that may be coming, or just like will already effects of COVID like giving us a position where we have such a high disease rate that other stuff can't be done. Like, how's that affecting neurovirus, all these other diseases that are going up more than where they were before the pandemic? Like cancer, how's that being affected by it when it's already increasing before? There's a lot of stuff to consider as we're going into next year. And just as a general idea, when we have these pathogens recombining or we have them evolving within people, there's always a chance that you get a new lineage that's dominant enough that changes the formula. And if stuff goes really awful, well, not really awful, but really unlucky, then we could have a potential disaster, if you think about it that way. So those are the main things I want you guys to keep in mind. I'll try and keep any updates on whatever happens. So a bird flu update, I'll try to do that eventually, where I will discuss the genes it's going to need to evolve and grab for it to get efficient human to human transmission. What that would mean is already ravaging poultry and wildlife outside, especially birds. So we have to think about how is that going to affect humans economically, right? Because that could lead to instability. And we also have to think about, okay, when it actually gets to the point where it's efficient human to human transmission, what are we going to do? Are we going to do nothing like we did last time and wait until the very end before we do anything? And then too many people die and things break like that? Or are we actually going to try and do better? You know? All right. I hope this video was informative for you people. Well, for everyone who's watching, I hope I'm making some sort of sense here. I tend to ramble, so I'm sorry. But this video should be helpful to you. I went over how COVID variants could start, lineages, vaccine updates, a brief history of what happened, and then I went over things to watch besides it. All right, I hope to see you guys in another video, and I'll catch you guys next time. Both of these videos should go up today. I hope you guys have a good day. Goodbye.